The night descends upon ancient Egypt like a silken veil. The desert sands glow faintly, reflecting the silver light of the moon, while the great Nile whispers in the distance, its waves rising and falling like the breathing of the earth itself. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of water mingling with the wind. This is not just a river. This is the lifeline of a civilization, the pulse of the land, the rhythm that carried dreams from one generation to another. The breeze is warm, yet soothing, scented with traces of incense and lotus flowers. In the far distance, you hear the soft murmur of temple chants, voices rising like smoke toward the stars. The temples of Isis and Osiris stand tall, their shadows stretching across the sand like ancient guardians of love and rebirth. Here, intimacy was never merely human. It was cosmic. It was sacred. It was written in the stars above, in the soil below, in the pulse of every heartbeat that belonged to Egypt. Imagine yourself lying on a bed of woven reeds, the stars glimmering overhead, as though the heavens themselves were watching over you. Ancient Egypt intimacy, the phrase itself carries weight, as if it unlocks doors to a hidden chamber. For the Egyptians, closeness between two souls was not shameful, nor something to be hidden. It was an echo of the divine, a mirror of creation itself. When the god Atum was said to have breathed life into the world, he did so through acts of union. Desire was not sin. It was creation. It was power. It was life itself. Tonight, as you listen, let your thoughts slow. Let the rhythm of the Nile synchronize with your breath. Each inhale cool and calm like the desert night. Each exhale a release like the tide returning to the river. You are safe here, in a land where the boundaries between human and God blur, where the mysteries of love are carved into papyrus and whispered in sacred halls. The desert wind carries grains of sand across your skin, but instead of discomfort, it feels like time itself brushing gently against you. Every particle of sand has seen centuries pass. Every stone has held secrets of desire, devotion, and longing. And as you drift into this world, you become part of its memory, part of its eternal story. Imagine the fragrance of blue lotus drifting toward you from the riverbank. The Egyptians once believed this flower could open the mind, guide the spirit into visions, and invite dreams of clarity. Its petals unfold now for you, soft and radiant, luring your soul into a state of peace. You are not alone here. The gods are near. Isis whispers through the wind, Osiris breathes in the rhythm of the river, and Horus watches with eyes that glow like distant stars. They do not judge, they only guide. They invite you to rest, to surrender to the calm, to drift slowly toward dreams woven with history and desire. Breathe deeply. Let the incense of temples, the scent of lotus, the murmur of the Nile, and the timeless breeze of Egypt lull you into serenity. This night is yours. This story is yours. And soon sleep will embrace you like the warm sands of the desert beneath a gentle, eternal sky. The night deepens, and the desert wind carries you to the doors of a temple. Imagine their weight, massive stone carved with symbols of gods and lovers, each line telling stories that were never meant for ordinary eyes. Behind these doors, whispers linger, whispers of rituals that blurred the line between worship and intimacy. The Egyptians believed that desire itself was a gift from the gods. It was not shameful, it was divine. To enter a temple was not only to kneel in prayer, but sometimes to participate in sacred acts meant to mirror the union of Isis and Osiris, or the eternal dance of sky and earth. This was sacred sex Egypt, not spoken aloud in the markets, not carved into public walls, but carried in hushed voices, written discreetly, and remembered only in fragments of papyrus. Close your eyes. Imagine stepping inside. The air is thick with incense, smoke curling upward like invisible prayers. You see priestesses in white linen robes, their movements slow and deliberate. Their voices rise in chant, and within those chants lies a rhythm, soft, hypnotic, almost like the rhythm of breath. Each note seems to draw you deeper, as if the temple itself is inviting you to surrender. It is here, in places like this, that intimacy and worship intertwined. Couples sought blessings, believing that the act of union under the gaze of the gods could bring fertility, prosperity, even eternal love. Some rituals whispered of priestesses who embodied the goddess Hathor, goddess of love and pleasure, offering their touch not as flesh, but as divine channel. To the Egyptians, this was not sin, this was connection. This was the sacred language of love. Imagine the flickering torches painting shadows across the walls. The statues of gods stand tall, their faces calm, yet watching. A man and a woman kneel together, not ashamed, but honored, believing that their closeness is a prayer more powerful than any words. This was the secret behind closed temple doors, the understanding that intimacy was creation, that love itself was an offering to eternity. And now, as you breathe slowly, the temple begins to fade into silence. The smoke, the chanting, the gentle flames, they dissolve into the calm night. What remains is a truth the ancients carried, that desire is not weakness, desire is life. Desire is the whisper of the divine flowing through us all. Let this truth cradle you tonight. As your breath slows, let the ancient rituals guide you toward peace. The gods are near, the night is soft, and the secrets of Egypt are here, waiting, not to shock you, but to soothe you, to remind you that love is eternal. Beyond the temple walls, hidden in quiet chambers and sealed tombs, the people of ancient Egypt left behind verses, fragments of longing, whispers of forbidden love. These were not the voices of kings or generals, but of ordinary men and women, their desires carried through time on fragile papyrus. Imagine a scroll unfolding in your hands. The ink is faint, the edges crumbling, but the words still burn with feeling. I will lie down with you, and the perfume of your hair will fill the air. Your body is sweet as ripened figs, and I am drunk with your presence. This was ancient erotic poetry, Egypt. Tender, yet bold, explicit, yet sacred. The Egyptians did not write these verses to shock, but to celebrate intimacy as part of life's beauty. To them, love was not hidden behind shame. It was a gift, worthy of ink, worthy of memory, worthy of eternity. Close your eyes and picture two lovers by the Nile, the moonlight shimmering on the water. The young woman whispers verses she has memorized from a papyrus, comparing her beloved to honey, to wine, to the lotus blooming at dawn. The man smiles, answering with his own verse, weaving her beauty into the language of gods and stars. Their love is not a secret act, it is poetry performed under the heavens. The walls of certain tombs even carry scenes of intimacy, painted not with judgment but with joy. Couples reclining together, hands touching, lips meeting, the sacred union of man and woman captured in art. These images were not hidden, they were offerings to eternity, messages to the gods that love and pleasure were part of the cycle of rebirth. Now, imagine yourself as the scribe. By candlelight, you dip a reed pen into ink. Each stroke is a heartbeat, each verse a prayer. You write not for history, but for love. Perhaps you write for someone who is far away, or for someone you will never touch again. Yet on papyrus, your desire lives, your passion breathes. The Egyptians believed words had power. To write was to cast a spell. To whisper love into papyrus was to ensure it would echo across centuries. And tonight, as you listen, those echoes reach you. They tell you that love, intimacy, and longing are eternal, that across thousands of years the heart still beats the same. Let these verses cradle you now. Let the voices of lovers from ancient times drift into your dreams. Their words are not loud, they are soft, flowing like the Nile, carrying you toward sleep. Breathe slowly. The papyrus rests in your hands, the ink fades into silence, and the whispers of ancient Egypt become your lullaby. Beyond poetry and whispers of passion, the Egyptians turned their desires into objects of power. Imagine standing in a dim chamber, shelves lined with charms, amulets, and curious tools carved from stone, wood, and ivory. Each one carried not only beauty, but meaning. Fragments of creative sexual rituals Egypt that sought to bind love, summon passion, or protect intimacy from envy and betrayal. A simple necklace might hold a small carving of Hathor, goddess of love, her face smiling softly. To wear it close to the skin was to carry her blessing, to invite affection and harmony into the body. Other charms were less gentle, amulets shaped like phalluses or lotus blossoms, tucked beneath clothing, hidden from the world, but pressed close to the heart. To modernize, they may seem shocking, yet to the Egyptians, they were not obscene. They were sacred tokens of life and fertility. Some rituals whispered of potions mixed with honey, wine, and crushed herbs, believed to ignite desire or bind the faithfulness of a lover. Others told of spells written on fragments of papyrus, folded carefully and tied with string, carried in secret by women who longed to capture a heart. These were love amulets, not dark sorcery, but hopeful prayers turned physical, delicate wishes wrapped in ink and thread. Imagine a young woman at twilight, kneeling by the Nile. She dips her charm into the water, believing that the river itself carries the voice of the gods. She whispers her beloved's name, letting the current take her prayer downstream. In that moment, her desire is not hidden, it is lifted into eternity. The Egyptians were not afraid of intimacy, nor did they bury their longing in silence. They embraced it, wove it into daily life, and gave it form through art, jewelry, ritual, and touch. Even the humblest farmer might carry a small charm carved in clay, while nobles and priests commissioned ornate pieces of gold, believing the more precious the material, the stronger the blessing. Some temples even preserved objects now puzzling to us: smooth stones, ivory wands, or decorated vessels believed to aid in intimacy. They were not seen as shameful, but as tools of harmony, bridges between body and spirit. In these acts and artifacts, intimacy became something larger than the individual. It became connection to the divine, to the cycles of birth and rebirth, to the pulse of life itself. Close your eyes. Imagine holding one of these amulets. It is cool in your palm, yet it hums with energy, as though centuries of longing are pressed within it. You breathe in, and you feel your chest loosen, your heart slow. The object is not just a relic, it is a reminder that intimacy, in its many forms, has always been part of human existence. Let the amulets guard your dreams tonight. Let the whispers of the river, the scent of incense, and the blessings of Hathor drift softly into your rest. The ancients remind you, love is not something to fear. Love is to be honored, to be held close, to be carried like a charm upon your soul.
As the night deepens, we turn from amulets and charms to the people themselves, especially to the women of ancient Egypt, whose voices, though faint in history, echo with strength in matters of love and desire. Unlike in many other ancient worlds, Egyptian women held power, both seen and unseen, in the intimacy of relationships and the rituals of passion. Imagine a noblewoman walking through the halls of her villa. Her jewelry glimmers in torchlight, but her true power lies not in gold, but in the freedom her society granted. Women in ancient Egypt could own land, sign contracts, divorce husbands, and inherit wealth. And with this freedom came a unique role in intimacy. They were not silent, but active. Women's sexuality in ancient Egypt was acknowledged, even celebrated, in poems, songs, and rituals. One papyrus speaks of a woman who boldly declares her longing. "I will go to the water with you. I will hold you in my arms, and I will not hide my desire." Her words were not scorned, but admired, written down as verses of passion. Egyptian women could confess love, initiate closeness, and even use love amulets to guard their unions. Their sexuality was not only physical, it was spiritual, political, and deeply connected to the rhythm of life. Consider the queens and priestesses, Nefertari, the beloved of Ramses, or Cleopatra centuries later. Their allure was not only beauty, but the way they wielded intimacy as diplomacy, weaving affection into strategy, desire into influence. Even the goddesses reflected this truth. Hathor, goddess of pleasure; Isis, goddess of devotion; Sekhmet, fierce yet passionate. Women were not shadows of men, they were channels of divine love, embodiments of sacred desire. In daily life, even an ordinary woman carried this quiet authority. A wife could refuse advances, a mother could arrange marriages, and a lover could choose when to open her heart. To lie beside a woman was not only to share warmth, but to touch a fragment of the sacred feminine, a reflection of the goddess herself. Close your eyes and imagine the whisper of a woman's voice in the dark, steady and confident. In ancient Egypt, such a whisper carried weight. It could bless, it could promise, it could bind. And it reminds us now that intimacy is not a one-sided story, but a dance, a dialogue, a balance of power. As the desert wind softens and the stars shift above you, you feel this truth settling around you. In love, as in life, women carried a power that was both gentle and unshakable. It was a power that shaped dynasties, guided rituals, and whispered across centuries. And so, as chapter 1 draws to its close, you drift into stillness, wrapped in the warmth of history's embrace. But the story does not end here, for beyond the soft power of women lies another secret of ancient Egypt, the way love itself was woven into worship, the way intimacy mirrored the union of gods. Soon, in the sacred halls of temples, we will step into chapter 2, Love and the Divine, where passion became ritual.
In the heart of Egyptian mythology lies one of the greatest love stories ever told, the union of Isis and Osiris. To the Egyptians, their story was not just myth, it was the foundation of life, death, and rebirth. It was proof that intimacy was sacred, that desire itself carried the power to shape the universe. Close your eyes and let the tale unfold. Osiris, the wise king, ruled with gentleness and justice. His queen Isis was not merely a consort, but a goddess of magic, devotion, and love. Together, they embodied harmony, the sacred balance of male and female, of strength and tenderness. To see them together was to see the gods remind humanity of the beauty of union. But envy lurked in the shadows. Set, brother of Osiris, burned with jealousy and rage. He plotted, and one night he tricked Osiris into lying inside a magnificent chest. With a crash, the chest was sealed and cast into the Nile. The river carried the body away, and Egypt mourned. Isis did not weep in silence. She searched tirelessly, her devotion burning like a flame in the desert winds. She found her husband's body hidden among reeds. She embraced him, kissed him, and through her love and magic, she breathed life into him again. For a moment, their union was restored. And in that sacred moment, Horus, the falcon child, was conceived, a son born of love stronger than death. To the Egyptians, this was more than a story. It was the foundation of sacred sex Egypt. Intimacy between man and woman was not just physical, it was divine creation, the echo of Isis and Osiris. When couples came together, they were reenacting this eternal myth. Their passion was not shameful, it was holy, it was rebirth. Imagine standing in a temple where priests retell this story by firelight. Each word carries weight, each image a reminder. Desire is not sin, it is life. The love of Isis did not just bring Osiris back for a fleeting moment. It renewed the world. It ensured that Egypt, nourished by the Nile, would bloom again and again. And so, in every touch, every embrace, the Egyptians saw a reflection of the gods.
Love was not simply human, it was divine, and to honor love was to honor creation itself. Breathe slowly and let this truth settle in your heart. The story of Isis and Osiris reminds us that intimacy, devotion, and desire are threads woven into the very fabric of life. Tonight, as the stars shine over the desert, let their union guide you into dreams. Dreams where love transcends death, where intimacy is sacred, where every heartbeat is an offering to eternity. In the temples of ancient Egypt, not all ceremonies were chants and offerings of food. Some were mysteries, guarded in whispers, where the boundary between worship and intimacy dissolved. To the Egyptians, desire was more than flesh. It was divine energy, a spark that mirrored the moment when Isis restored Osiris to life. Imagine stepping into the dim heart of a temple at night. The walls are painted with stars, the air thick with incense, and the floor lit by flickering lamps. Priests and priestesses move in silence, their linen garments flowing like rivers of light. This was no ordinary ritual. It was a rite of rebirth. The Egyptians believed that through sacred union, the cycles of death and life could be renewed. Fertility rites were performed not as shameful acts, but as offerings to the gods, echoes of the sacred myth. In some temples, couples, whether priestess and priest or chosen devotees, enacted rituals of intimacy to symbolize the union of Isis and Osiris. It was not indulgence, it was creation. Close your eyes and hear the rhythm of the chants, slow, steady, like the beating of the earth's heart. Each note carried the weight of centuries, each word a spell to draw down divine blessing. The lovers who joined under this rhythm were believed to channel the gods themselves. Their closeness became a prayer. Their desire became an altar. Their union became the promise that the Nile would flood again, that crops would bloom, that Egypt would endure. There are stories of sacred chambers, hidden rooms within the temples, where the most secret rituals of fertility took place. The bed was not just a place of rest, it was a shrine. Perfumed oils were offered, lotus blossoms scattered across sheets of linen, and statues of Hathor and Min, the gods of love and potency, looked on with calm, unblinking eyes. To us today, these acts might seem strange, even forbidden, but to the Egyptians, they were holy. They were bridges between the mortal and the divine. To love, to touch, to embrace in the sacred space of a temple was to reenact creation itself. It was to remind the universe that life must continue, that the cycle of birth and rebirth is eternal. Breathe slowly. Imagine yourself in that chamber, the air warm with incense, the floor cool beneath your feet, the sound of chants echoing through the stone. You feel the presence of gods around you, not judging, not condemning, but blessing. Your body and your soul are one with the rhythm of life. The ritual fades into silence, but its truth remains. Intimacy was never separate from faith. For the Egyptians, love itself was worship. And in their temples, rebirth was not just a hope, it was a sacred act.
If Isis was devotion and Osiris was rebirth, then Hathor was joy itself. To the Egyptians, she was more than a goddess. She was the laughter in music, the rhythm of dance, the sweetness of love, and the blessing of intimacy. Known as the Lady of Heaven and the Mistress of Music, Hathor embodied both tenderness and desire, showing that pleasure was not sinful but sacred. Imagine entering a festival in her honor. The streets are alive with drums, flutes, and the shaking of sistrums, sacred rattles used in her worship. Men and women dance beneath garlands of flowers. Wine flows freely. Laughter rises into the night air, and everywhere there is a sense of release, of joy unbound. To celebrate Hathor was to celebrate life. But behind the music and dancing lay deeper rituals. In certain temples, priestesses of Hathor offered songs, oils, and embraces as acts of devotion. Pleasure was not indulgence, it was worship. To touch, to laugh, to share intimacy was to honor the goddess herself. This was sacred pleasure rituals in Egypt, moments when joy became a prayer, when the body itself became an altar. Hathor was also linked to fertility. Couples seeking children would come to her shrines, leaving tokens of lotus blossoms, figs, and amulets carved in her likeness. Some stories speak of women sleeping within her temples, believing that dreams blessed by Hathor would open their wombs to new life. Intimacy here was not hidden. It was guided by the goddess, wrapped in her laughter and song. Close your eyes and imagine the temple at night. The air is heavy with perfume. A priestess sings softly, her voice like the Nile's current, gentle, flowing, irresistible. You hear the sistrum's silver chime, steady and soothing, as if reminding you of the heartbeat of the world. Within this rhythm, lovers hold each other, their closeness a reflection of Hathor's blessing. The Egyptians did not see pleasure as dangerous or shameful. They saw it as divine harmony. To kiss, to laugh, to make love under Hathor's gaze was to align with the universe's joy. Even the afterlife promised her embrace, for she welcomed souls into paradise with music, wine, and eternal celebration. Tonight, let Hathor's voice drift into your dreams. Let her laughter echo softly in your heart. Know that joy is sacred, that intimacy is not weakness, but strength. For the goddess of love whispers still, to live, to love, to feel pleasure, is to honor life itself. If Hathor was joy and Isis was devotion, then Men was the raw, unshakable force of fertility. To the Egyptians, he was not a god of shame, but a god of power, potency, renewal, and the eternal cycle of life. His image, often depicted with erect manhood and a hand raised in blessing, might seem startling to modern eyes. Yet in the ancient temples it was sacred, a reminder that sexuality was not hidden but exalted. Imagine standing before his statue, carved from stone, painted in ochre, towering in a shrine filled with offerings of lettuce, wine, and incense. The people brought these not as trivial gifts, but as prayers for abundance, of crops, of herds, of children. Men, fertility god Egypt, was not only protector of reproduction, he was the living symbol of strength, vitality, and continuity. Festivals of men were moments of both celebration and awe. Priests carried his statue high, while men and women sang, danced, and lifted offerings to the sky. There are whispers that during these rites, sacred acts of intimacy were performed, not in secret, but as rituals to renew the bond between gods and mortals. Sexuality, under men's gaze, became not indulgence, but duty, not private, but cosmic. Close your eyes and imagine the desert winds swirling around the festival ground. The chant of the crowd is steady, the beat of drums unending. A priest raises lettuce, men's sacred plant, believed to heighten fertility, and offers it with prayers. The scent of oil and incense thickens the air. And within this sacred moment, couples may have reenacted the power of creation itself, embodying men's blessing through touch, union, and desire. To the Egyptians, men's potency was not embarrassing, it was divine. Just as the Nile flooded each year, bringing life to the land, so too did men ensure that life continued through human love. He was the balance between earth and sky, the bridge between mortality and eternity. His image on temple walls was not scandal, but promise. Even the pharaoh himself was sometimes linked to men in ritual, as a symbol that the king carried divine potency, capable of renewing Egypt just as the god renewed the world. In this sense, sexuality was not only personal, it was political, a foundation of power, a sacred duty tied to the survival of the nation. Breathe slowly. Picture yourself at the foot of men's shrine, the flicker of torches casting shadows on the stone. His figure is unblinking, eternal, strong. Yet within his power is not threat, but blessing. He reminds you that intimacy is not something to fear. It is life. It is renewal. It is sacred strength. Tonight, let men's presence drift into your dreams. Let him remind you that desire is not weakness, but the pulse of existence, the rhythm of the eternal cycle. For in Egypt, to honor men was to honor creation itself. In the heart of Egypt's temples, intimacy was not only between man and woman, it was between mortal and divine. The Egyptians believed that in moments of closeness, the boundary between human flesh and eternal spirit could dissolve. This was mystical intimacy. Egypt, the union where love became worship, where passion became prayer, and where every embrace was a mirror of the gods themselves. Imagine standing beneath the towering columns of Karnak, the sky above open and endless, a priestess whispers prayers to Hawthorne, the goddess of love, as a young couple kneels before the altar, their hands entwined, their hearts steady. When they touch, they do not touch alone. They call upon Isis, Osiris, Min, and Hawthorne. Their intimacy becomes an offering, their desire a sacred fire. To the Egyptians, such closeness was never merely physical. It was cosmic. Just as the Nile's waters mingled with the desert sands to bring forth green life, so too did the joining of lovers echo the eternal cycle. In their eyes, to love was to align with creation itself, to step briefly into the realm of gods. Some rituals spoke of dreams where mortals were visited by deities, Isis whispering comfort, Hawthorne singing in the night, Min appearing as strength. These were not idle fantasies, but encounters of the spirit. To awaken from such dreams was to carry a blessing, a reminder that intimacy was a bridge across worlds. Close your eyes and feel this truth. When two souls meet, the divine listens. Every kiss, every embrace is not lost in silence. It rises, carried like incense into eternity. In this way, love itself became a liturgy, and intimacy a sacred hymn. And so, as chapter 2 draws to a close, you rest with the knowledge that in ancient Egypt, passion was never forbidden. It was revered, it was holy, it was the living language of gods and mortals alike. But the story continues, for not all of Egypt's secrets were carved in stone or enacted in temples. Some were written, delicate verses of longing, poems etched upon papyrus, where the whispers of lovers became eternal flame. Soon, in chapter 3, we will unroll those scrolls and listen to burning verses on papyrus, poems of desire and intimacy, soft words that cross the desert winds to reach you tonight.
Among the treasures of ancient Egypt, gold may shine and stone may endure, but it is on fragile papyrus that the most intimate secrets were preserved. There, in delicate handwriting, lovers confessed their longing, their passion, their joy. These verses, known today as ancient erotic poetry Egypt, were not hidden in shame. They were recited, celebrated, and cherished as music for the heart. Imagine unrolling a scroll by lamplight. The papyrus crackles softly, the ink dark yet alive. The words speak across centuries. Your love is mixed within my body, like wine in water, like perfume in lotus petals. My desire is not hidden. I will wait for you at the riverbank. These are not lines of politics or war. They are whispers of intimacy, words of desire written with tenderness. To the Egyptians, love was as natural as the Nile's flood, as inevitable as sunrise. And their poetry embraced this truth, each verse shimmering with longing, yet gentle enough to soothe the heart. Picture a young woman in Thebes, her hair braided with lotus flowers, holding a strip of papyrus close to her lips. She reads the lines her beloved has written. When I see you, I am alive. Without you, I wither like a field without water.
In that moment, she feels his presence even though miles of desert separate them. Poetry was their bridge, their silent embrace across distance. The rhythm of these poems often mirrored the natural world. Lovers compared kisses to honey, embraces to shade under sycamores, passion to the flooding Nile. The body was not something shameful, but celebrated, a vessel of life, joy, and divine echo. In these verses, intimacy Egypt was not forbidden, it was eternal. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of these poems recited aloud. A soft voice, steady and slow, as though each word is a caress. The listener drifts into calm, lulled by rhythm, carried by longing. Just as the Egyptians believed that music could heal the soul, so too could poetry bring balance to desire. Tonight, as you rest, let these whispers reach you across the sands of time. Let them remind you that love is older than empires, older than monuments. It is written in fragile ink, carried on fragile papyrus, yet it endures. A single verse, fragile but burning, can outlast even stone. And perhaps, as you drift into sleep, you will feel what those lovers felt, the trembling joy of a verse read in the quiet of night, a secret flame lighting the heart.
The poets of ancient Egypt loved to weave desire into the language of nature. To them, the beloved was not described with cold words, but with images alive and fragrant. The lotus that blooms at dawn, the sweetness of honey on the tongue, the comforting shade beneath a sycamore tree. In these metaphors, passion was softened, transformed into poetry that still lingers across time. On one papyrus, a woman writes of her lover. "He is lotus in the water. When he rises, my heart opens. His fragrance is upon me, and I am reborn." The lotus, sacred to the Egyptians, symbolized purity, rebirth, and also secret desire. Just as the flower closed at night and blossomed with the morning sun, so too did lovers find themselves renewed in each other's presence. To say, "You are my lotus," was to whisper, "You are the reason I live. You awaken me." Honey was another symbol woven into their verses. Sweetness was never just taste, it was intimacy. A papyrus fragment reads, "Your lips are sweeter than honey, your embrace more nourishing than bread. When you speak, my soul is drunk with delight." These were not hidden or scandalous words. They were sung, read aloud, even performed at feasts. Desire, when compared to honey, became gentle, nourishing, and divine. It was pleasure as sustenance, love as life itself. And then there was shade. In the burning desert, to find shade beneath a tree was salvation. Lovers often compared each other's embrace to this cool refuge. One verse declares, "I rest in your arms, as in the shadow of a sycamore tree. The sun cannot burn me here. You are my shelter, my place of peace."
In such lines, passion is not wild, but calm. Love is not chaos, but sanctuary. To touch the beloved is to step out of the scorching sun and into eternal rest. Close your eyes and let these metaphors bloom around you. Imagine the cool petals of lotus, the golden taste of honey, the soothing calm of shade. This was how the Egyptians spoke of love, not with bluntness, but with beauty. Their lovers became gardens, rivers, oases of life. As you drift tonight, let these images settle into your heart, for perhaps in your dreams you too will find a lotus blooming, a kiss like honey, and a shelter of shade where love whispers through the centuries.
Not all Egyptian love poems spoke of joy. Many carried the tender ache of longing, the space between lovers, the restless nights, the desert that seemed to stretch endlessly between two hearts. This longing was not weakness, it was devotion, etched in ink upon fragile papyrus, a testimony that desire itself was eternal. One fragment reads, "My heart is restless, my body on fire. I walk the streets at night, seeking your shadow. Without you, the stars burn me." Here, desire becomes more than physical. It is an all-consuming presence, a fever of the soul. To long for someone was not shameful in ancient Egypt. It was poetic, a sign of love's strength. Imagine a young man in Memphis staring across the Nile, whispering into the wind, "She is on the far bank, and I cannot cross. My heart sails to her, though my body remains here." His words drift into the night, carried on the river's current. He knows she may not hear him, yet the act of longing itself is sacred. It ties him to her, as invisible as the stars above, as enduring as the desert sands. Another verse says, "When you are gone, my bed is empty straw. When you return, it becomes a garden of lilies." The contrast is sharp. Absence feels like drought, presence like bloom. For the Egyptians, desire was a cycle like the Nile. Absence was the dry season, reunion the flood that renewed life. In these poems, longing itself was part of intimacy, just as necessary as touch. Close your eyes now. Feel the pulse of waiting, the soft ache of distance. Remember that longing, too, is a form of love. It is the pause before music, the silence before dawn. The Egyptians knew this truth, that sometimes the sweetest desire lies not in the kiss itself, but in the yearning for it. And so their verses remain, whispers of longing across 3,000 years, still alive, still burning. Not all verses on papyrus were subtle. Some were bold, their imagery direct, their desire unveiled. Yet even in their boldness, they carried elegance. This was the genius of Egyptian poetry,
to speak of intimacy without vulgarity, to clothe passion in metaphor, and to make the body itself a poem. One verse, preserved in a fragment, reads, "I will go down to the water, where you wait for me, your hand upon mine, your breath against my neck. I cannot stand without you." Though simple, these lines pulse with physical intimacy. The touch, the breath, the nearness, each is described plainly, yet the rhythm makes it tender, not crude. The Egyptians were unafraid to let desire take form in touch, to let desire breathe in words. Another fragment dares to be even more vivid. "My lover is strong as a bull. He seizes me in the night. I am powerless, yet I laugh in his arms." Here, bold imagery, strength, seizing, surrender, is softened by joy. The laughter transforms what might be harsh into something playful, intimate, human. The Egyptians knew that desire could be wild, but they also knew it could be joyous. Often, metaphors of food and drink carry deeper meanings. A woman writes, "I will drink your sweetness until I am drunk with you. My lips will not leave yours. My hunger is endless." In these words, passion is hunger, thirst, intoxication. Yet as it grows bold, the poem remains a song, not an outcry. The verses transform intimacy into feast, desire into abundance. Close your eyes and imagine these words recited in a candlelit chamber. The air heavy with perfume, the papyrus unrolled gently, a lover's voice steady and soft. The boldness becomes not scandal, but closeness. It is the moment when masks fall away, when the heart dares to speak plainly. For the Egyptians, writing such poems was not shameful, it was celebration. To write desire on papyrus was to make it eternal, to honor intimacy as part of life's cycle. And so these fragments survive, whispers of passion that dared to be spoken, whispers that still stir us now. Tonight, as you drift into rest, let these bold verses remind you, love is not always hidden. Sometimes it must be spoken, daring and true. And when it is spoken with tenderness, it becomes eternal music.
To the Egyptians, words were not only sounds, they were power. Spoken, they could bless or curse. Written, they could outlive stone. And when words were shaped into poetry of love, they became more than confession. They became spells. Some papyri reveal verses that were not mere poems, but charms meant to draw the beloved near. A woman might recite lines under the moon, believing that Isis herself would carry her words into her lover's dreams. One fragment whispers, "May he not sleep until he thinks of me. May his heart burn until he comes. I am the lotus upon his chest. He will not breathe without me." This is not only poetry, it is invocation, a plea transformed into enchantment, where desire itself becomes a form of magic. Ancient love spells Egypt were often woven with imagery of flowers, rivers, and fire, symbols of life, movement, and passion. Some papyri charms even instructed the reader to burn the verse,
letting the smoke rise like a message to the gods. Others were to be folded and worn against the skin, a living bond between words and flesh. In these moments, poetry was no longer distant, it was intimate, physical, alive. Imagine the quiet of a chamber lit by oil lamps. A lover holds a strip of papyrus close, whispering each line slowly. With every word, they believe the distance between them and their beloved shrinks. The papyrus becomes not paper, but bridge. The poem becomes not art, but spell. Even pharaohs were not untouched by such magic. Records speak of rulers commissioning charms to ensure loyalty and passion from their queens. Love, in this way, was not only personal, but political, a force so strong it required divine sanction. Close your eyes and let these words swirl like incense. Picture the lines glowing as they are read, the air heavy with intention. This was how the Egyptians saw love, not passive, not fragile, but powerful enough to bend fate. And so, chapter 3 closes with this truth. In Egypt, love poetry was not only art, it was ritual, spell, and magic. A kiss could be verse, a verse could be enchantment, and enchantment could last forever. But the journey continues, for beyond words, the Egyptians crafted objects, amulets, charms, and curious instruments that carried their desires. Strange creations born of belief, creativity, and longing. As we turn to chapter 4, we will walk among these artifacts, listening to the whispers of unusual creations and curious beliefs.
In the shadowed chambers of ancient Egypt, love did not rely only on words or glances. It often called for something more tangible, objects that carried power, amulets shaped by belief, and charms designed to capture desire itself. To the Egyptians, intimacy was sacred, and sometimes sacredness needed a vessel. One of the most common creations were love amulets, small carvings of stone, faience, or metal, inscribed with prayers or symbols. These amulets were often worn close to the skin, hidden beneath linen garments, believed to draw the gaze of the beloved or bind the affection of a partner. Some bore the image of Hathor, goddess of love, while others carried hieroglyphs invoking passion and fertility. Imagine a young woman slipping a small amulet around her neck, shaped like a lotus bud. To her, it was more than decoration. It was protection, enchantment, and promise. As the lotus blossomed in the sun, so too, she believed, would her lover's heart open toward her. Some amulets were bolder, carved in unmistakable shapes of fertility and pleasure. These objects, though unusual to modern eyes, were not considered shameful. They were symbols of life itself, reminders that love and intimacy were divine gifts. Creative sexual rituals in Egypt often began not with touch, but with the ritual of carrying such amulets, whispering to them, feeding them with incense and prayers. The most curious amulets were those that carried binding spells. A man might bury one near the threshold of his beloved's house, believing that each step she took would tie her heart closer to his.
Another might cast one into the Nile, trusting the river to carry his desire to the gods. Close your eyes and imagine the weight of such an object in your palm. Smooth stone, warm from the skin, etched with symbols older than memory. Feel how belief turns simple matter into living magic. To the Egyptians, these amulets were not oddities. They were threads between worlds, between passion and eternity. And so, when we whisper of odd Egyptian sex tools tonight, we are not speaking of crude inventions, but of talismans, fragile, powerful, and strange, meant to turn desire into destiny.
When we imagine intimacy, knives may seem far away, cold, and sharp. Yet in ancient Egypt, ceremonial blades carried meanings that were neither violent nor cruel. They were symbols, often connected to fertility, protection, and the sacred bonds of union. Among wedding rituals and sexual symbolism, the ritual knife appeared as an instrument of transition. Crafted from flint or bronze, its blade was rarely used for cutting flesh. Instead, it was used to cut unseen forces, to separate the profane from the sacred, to mark the passage from maidenhood into union, to symbolically clear obstacles between two lovers. Some ivory-handled knives, richly decorated, have been found in tombs. Their carvings show animals, plants, and sometimes erotic imagery, linking the knife not to death, but to life, fertility, and rebirth. Imagine a priestess holding such a blade above a couple, drawing invisible lines in the air, whispering prayers to Hathor. The knife never touched skin, but it marked the moment when two lives were bound together. There are also accounts of knives placed under the marriage bed, believed to protect the couple from jealous spirits or wandering eyes. The blade, resting unseen, was a guardian, an edge sharp enough to cut envy, a presence to ensure harmony. To modernize, these customs may appear strange, but to the Egyptians, every symbol carried layers of meaning. The knife was not weapon, but talisman. It was purity, power, and promise, a reminder that intimacy itself was a sacred passage. Equally unusual were certain marriage symbols exchanged between partners. Figurines shaped like fertility gods, miniature tools, or amulets resembling phalluses were sometimes gifted as tokens of strength and continuity. A bride might carry one as protection, or a groom might place one in the home as blessing. These objects were not hidden, they were displayed with pride because they spoke of life's most essential forces. Close your eyes and picture such a ritual. The dim chamber, the scent of incense curling upward, the rhythmic chant of priests. A blade of polished bronze glimmers, but it does not wound. Instead, it cuts the unseen, marking a threshold. And as the couple steps forward, they do so beneath symbols that are at once odd and powerful, ancient and eternal. These odd Egyptian sex tools, these curious creations, remind us that intimacy was never merely private. It was woven into ritual, guarded by symbols, lifted
into the realm of the sacred.
In ancient Egypt, birth was more than biology. It was the renewal of the cosmos, the continuation of divine order, the touch of eternity upon human flesh. And so fertility was surrounded by objects of power, amulets, charms, and strange artifacts created to ensure that new life would come forth strong and blessed. One of the most famous of these charms was the amulet of Taweret, the hippo goddess. With the body of a hippopotamus, the paws of a lion, and the back of a crocodile, she may seem fearsome, yet to Egyptians she was the gentle guardian of mothers, protector of childbirth, the one who chased away evil spirits from the birthing chamber. Women often wore amulets in her likeness, small figurines strung around their necks or kept under their pillows, believing her presence would ease the pain of labor and shield both mother and child. Another powerful figure was Bes, the dwarf god with a lion's mane. Unlike the solemn gods carved in temples, Bes was playful, almost comical, yet deeply sacred. His image, often on amulets placed near the bed, was believed to bring joy, protect from nightmares, and ensure fertility. In moments of intimacy, couples might call upon him, trusting his laughter and wild dance to chase away misfortune and welcome new life. There were also charms of more unusual forms. Some amulets were carved as phalluses or womb-like shapes, not out of vulgarity, but symbolism. They were visual prayers, fertility captured in form. A woman might place such an amulet in her clothing, or a husband might bury one in the fields, believing it would make the soil as fertile as his wife's womb. Texts on papyrus sometimes carried instructions for magical rites of fertility. They spoke of mixing oils, burning incense, or chanting sacred names while holding an amulet to the belly. These were not empty gestures, they were acts of faith, bridges between the human body and divine blessing. Egyptian fertility amulets were less about superstition and more about trust in the god's embrace. Close your eyes and picture such a scene. A quiet home at dusk, a woman tracing her fingers along a small figurine of Taweret, whispering prayers into the night. The air smells of myrrh, the Nile glimmers beyond the window, and hope fills the chamber. The amulet, simple yet profound, becomes the anchor of a family's future. In these objects we see not odd relics, but sacred companions, tiny vessels of faith and longing. They remind us that to the Egyptians, love and life were not separate. Intimacy was a river flowing into birth, and birth was the continuation of the universe itself.
Not all amulets of Egypt were gentle. Some carried the shape of creatures both feared and revered, symbols of danger transformed into protectors, threats remade into charms of love and power. Among the most curious were those shaped like serpents and crocodiles, guardians of both fertility and passion. The serpent amulet was common in both jewelry and ritual. The serpent, often linked to the goddess Wadjet, symbolized protection, healing, and renewal. Yet in the realm of intimacy, it also carried meanings of desire and potency. A coiled serpent carved in stone or glazed faience might be worn by men, believed to enhance virility, or by women, thought to draw passion and ensure loyalty. In its curve, Egyptians saw both danger and allure, a reminder that desire itself was a force both sacred and wild. The crocodile, feared for its strength in the Nile, was tied to the god Sobek. His presence was both terrifying and life-giving. Some charms bore miniature crocodile figures, believed to channel Sobek's fierce energy into fertility and dominance. Couples might place such figures in their homes, trusting that the raw vitality of the Nile's guardian would flow into their union. For Egyptians, even predators became allies when reshaped into symbols. More curious still were sexual objects imbued with magic. Archaeologists have uncovered figurines and carvings shaped like exaggerated phalluses, not merely as crude images, but as talismans of strength, pleasure, and protection. Some were worn as pendants, some placed in tombs to ensure passion carried into the afterlife. To the Egyptians, the boundary between desire and eternity was thin. Intimacy was not shame. It was continuity, energy reborn. Imagine a small amulet, serpent entwined with lotus flower, resting against the skin. To the wearer, it was more than ornament. It was spell, shield, and invitation. Or picture a figurine of crocodile hidden beneath the marriage bed, guarding the couple from envy and weakness. These were not eccentricities to Egyptians. They were necessities, the weaving of life's fiercest forces into the tender bond of love. Close your eyes now. Let the hiss of the serpent, the splash of the crocodile, the pulse of magical objects whisper through the night. They remind us that in Egypt, desire was not only personal, it was cosmic, shaped and shielded by the very creatures that swam the Nile and coiled in the sands. And so, through serpents and crocodiles, through phallic charms and magical figurines, the Egyptians declared that passion itself was divine.
As we have wandered through the chambers of Egypt's unusual creations, amulets of love, ceremonial knives, charms of fertility, serpents, crocodiles, and magical objects, we begin to see a pattern. None of these were random curiosities. Each was a thread in a tapestry, woven from faith, creativity, and longing. For the Egyptians, desire was not hidden in shame. It was elevated, sculpted, inscribed, transformed into ritual. A lover's amulet was not just stone. It was prayer. A ceremonial knife was not just metal, it was threshold. A serpent carved into jewelry was not merely an ornament, it was the breath of power, coiled and waiting. In these creations, we glimpse a culture unafraid to declare that intimacy was divine. It was not only the joining of bodies, but the continuation of life, the echo of cosmic balance. Every charm, every odd tool, every whispered verse was part of the same truth. Love was eternal, and desire was worthy of reverence. Close your eyes and picture this harmony. A small home along the Nile, where a woman clutches an amulet of Taweret, while a priestess whispers blessings. A temple chamber where knives gleam not to wound, but to separate shadow from light. A marriage bed guarded by crocodile charms. a heart stirred by erotic verses hidden in papyrus. Faith, creativity, and desire woven into every corner of life. And this harmony was not abstract. It was lived, embodied, often carried in the hands of women. For in Egypt, women were not only receivers of rituals, but participants, leaders, and sometimes initiators of desire's magic. To understand this, we must step forward into the next chapter, where we listen to the whispers of queens, priestesses, and wives. Chapter 4 closes with the realization that Egypt's intimacy was not only passion, nor only ritual, but both. It was where belief met creativity, where longing became invention, where the sacred and sensual became one. And so the doors open into Chapter 5, Women and Sexuality in Ancient Egypt, where the voices of women, often soft yet powerful, reveal how intimacy was also a source of agency, influence, and mystery.
In the golden sands of ancient Egypt, women were not invisible figures in the realm of intimacy. They stood at the very center of love, desire, and even politics. From the chambers of queens to the humble homes of farmers' wives, women shaped how sexuality was lived, expressed, and remembered. A queen like Nefertiti or Cleopatra was not merely a consort. She was an embodiment of beauty, grace, and allure, often depicted as partner and equal to her king. Ancient art shows queens seated beside pharaohs, sometimes in tender poses, their hands resting on each other's shoulders. These were not empty gestures. They symbolized that a woman's presence in intimacy was not passive but active, a source of power that could inspire rulers, sway decisions, even alter the course of kingdoms. For common women, too, sexuality was not hidden. Papyrus poems describe wives longing for their husbands, waiting for their return from the fields or military campaigns. In these verses, the wife's desire is not silenced, it is sung. She speaks of his scent, his embrace, his absence. Her words reveal that intimacy was a shared language, where women had a voice, a yearning, and a place. But there was also softness in this power. Unlike the sharpness of political authority, women's influence in the bedroom was subtle, delicate, almost invisible, yet undeniable. A wife could calm tensions through affection or secure loyalty through closeness. This was women's sexuality in ancient Egypt, not simply physical, but deeply woven into the threads of family, harmony, and legacy. Imagine a quiet night along the Nile. A wife places perfumed oil upon her skin, waiting for her husband. The air carries the scent of lotus. The room glows with lamplight. In her presence, he does not see only a partner, but also strength, devotion, and continuity. Her intimacy is not only pleasure, but also the promise of home. Thus, in Egypt, a woman's role in sexuality was both private and public, soft yet strong. She was not merely an object of desire. She was desire itself, given voice, given shape, given power.
In the quiet folds of Egyptian society, fidelity was more than personal, it was sacred order. Marriage was not merely a union of two hearts, but a bond overseen by gods, witnessed by community, and recorded in contracts. And within this framework, the question of infidelity carried both weight and silence. For women, loyalty was highly valued. Texts from legal papyri describe cases where a wife caught in adultery could face severe punishment, divorce, loss of property, or even execution in rare circumstances. Yet these texts also reveal something subtler. Infidelity was not simply about betrayal of a spouse, it was seen as a disruption of Ma'at, the cosmic balance that Egypt strove to uphold. For men, the rules were more complex. A husband might have multiple wives or concubines, especially among nobility, and this was often tolerated or even accepted. Yet betrayal of trust, deceit, or relations that threatened inheritance rights could still provoke scandal. Infidelity, therefore, was not only moral but social, an act that could fracture family stability and social harmony. And yet, beneath these rules, there was silence. Love poems hint at longing beyond marriage. Tales whisper of queens whose power was tied to rumored affairs, though often shrouded in metaphor. Papyrus fragments suggest that affairs happened, but were rarely spoken of openly. The hush itself was telling. Infidelity lived in the shadows, at once feared and desired, a reminder that passion often resists boundaries. Close your eyes and imagine a quiet village along the Nile. A woman lowers her gaze, carrying secrets in her heart. A man, fearful of scandal, locks his desires behind silence. The laws of fidelity hang like invisible threads, binding, restraining, yet fragile. For even in the most ordered society, longing sometimes slips through. This was Infidelity Rules Egypt, strict in law, soft in whispers. Women bore heavier burdens, for their loyalty was tied to lineage and inheritance. Yet both men and women lived under the same truth. Desire is restless, and silence was often the only shield. Thus, Egyptian intimacy was not only about openness and sacred rituals, it also carried the weight of secrecy, the hush of forbidden moments, the tension between law and longing. And in this silence, women's voices are heard, not always loudly, but with subtle strength. Their stories, often hidden, remind us that even in a world ruled by gods and pharaohs, the heart could still wander.
In ancient Egypt, beauty was not vanity, it was power. Women understood that allure could be as influential as law or wealth, and so they mastered the art of adornment, weaving cosmetics, perfumes, and jewelry into a silent language of seduction. The eyes were the most striking feature. Women painted them with kohl, black lines sweeping outward like the wings of falcons. More than beauty, this was ritual. The dark pigment protected against glare, repelled disease, and drew the gaze of lovers. A glance framed by kohl was not just a look, it was a spell, a charm cast in silence. Perfumes were another weapon of intimacy. Oils of lotus, myrrh, and frankincense were pressed into the skin, filling the air with sweetness. A woman's scent lingered long after she passed, an invisible presence that stirred longing. Ancient texts even mention perfumed cones worn on the head during banquets, melting slowly in the heat releasing fragrance like a slow-burning offering of desire. Jewelry, too, spoke of both beauty and fertility. Beaded necklaces, amulets of gold, rings shaped like lotus or scarabs. These were not mere ornaments. They declared status, invoked protection, and enhanced allure. To see a woman shimmering in moonlight, jewels glinting, oils gleaming on her skin, was to see power disguised as elegance. Even cosmetics carried layers of meaning. Red ochre for lips, malachite for eyelids, henna for nails. Each stroke was deliberate, each color a message. Painted lips whispered invitation. Green-shadowed eyes promised mystery. Stained nails hinted at vitality. Seduction was not blunt, it was artistry. Imagine a chamber at dusk. A woman sits before a bronze mirror, painting her eyes, smoothing fragrant oil into her hair. Outside, the Nile reflects the fading sun. In her preparations, there is no haste, no noise, only ritual. She is not only adorning herself, she is weaving a spell, ready to greet her lover with the quiet thunder of beauty. This was women's sexuality in ancient Egypt. Soft, subtle, yet commanding. Beauty was not frivolous. It was weapon and prayer, charm and command. And in every stroke of kohl, every drop of lotus oil, women carried the timeless truth that desire often listens to silence more than words.
In ancient Egypt, power was never only held in temples or thrones. It also flowed through the hidden chambers of intimacy, where women, queens and priestesses, could wield desire as both ritual and strategy. The queen was more than a wife. She was often seen as the earthly embodiment of goddesses like Hathor or Isis. Her union with the pharaoh was not just personal, it was divine theater, a reenactment of cosmic love stories. When a queen touched her king, it was Isis embracing Osiris, love reborn as power. In this way, intimacy became politics. The queen's allure was not only her own, but a reflection of divine legitimacy. A pharaoh strengthened by her presence was believed to rule with harmony, balance, and fertility for the entire land. Priestesses, too, held subtle yet profound authority. In certain rituals, women served as living vessels of goddesses, embodying their sensuality and grace. To witness them dance, sing, or anoint with sacred oils was to experience not mere performance, but divine intimacy. Some rites of fertility involved symbolic union, acts in which women, as chosen representatives, channeled sacred pleasure to ensure the fertility of crops, rivers, and people. Here, women's sexuality in ancient Egypt was not private at all. It was a bridge between humans and gods. Even in whispers of history, stories remain of powerful women whose relationships became tools of diplomacy. Cleopatra, centuries later, would become the most famous, weaving allure into politics, though she stood at the edge of Egypt's ancient tradition. But even before her, queens were rumored to have used charm to sway alliances, priestesses to guide kings, wives of nobles to weave networks of influence. Close your eyes and imagine the palace by night. The pharaoh sits in his chamber, the weight of ruleship heavy upon him. Beside him, the queen places her hand gently on his shoulder. In that gesture lies not only comfort, but command. Or picture a temple lit with lamps, where priestesses move like shadows of Hathor, their voices rising in sacred song. Desire here is not indulgence, it is ceremony, cosmic alignment, governance. Thus, women in power did not separate their sexuality from their authority. They fused the two. Beauty became law, intimacy became ritual, and the whispers of desire carried the echoes of Egypt's destiny. Through queens and wives, through priestesses and dancers, through the poetry of longing and the rituals of beauty, women in ancient Egypt carried the weight of intimacy in ways both visible and hidden. And yet, behind all these images, there lingers a silence that speaks, the silence of the papyrus fragment, where a name has been erased, leaving only the trace of a lover's yearning, the silence of a tomb wall, where women are painted in gestures of affection, yet no words explain the whispers behind their smiles, the silence of law, strict and heavy, yet unable to fully capture the secret movements of desire. For in Egypt, women's sexuality was not only power, or ritual, or seduction, it was also mystery. Much of it remains concealed, lost in the desert winds, buried beneath the Nile's shifting sands. What stories were never told? What verses were hidden? What desires remained unspoken, passed only through the quiet touch of hand to hand? Close your eyes and feel that silence. It is not emptiness, it is fullness withheld, a secret garden where love was both celebrated and concealed. Women carried not only the role of lover, wife, and goddess, but also of keeper of secrets. Their silence was not weakness, it was strength, the power to guard mysteries from time itself. And so, Chapter 5 closes with this truth. Women's intimacy in ancient Egypt was layered. It was passion and duty, power and vulnerability, ritual and silence. To understand Egypt's sexuality is to accept that some parts were never meant to be shouted, only whispered in the stillness of night. But silence also held another truth. Within the hush of secrets lay the beginnings of new life, for from intimacy arose fertility. From whispered desire came children, heirs, and the continuation of the world. Thus, as one chapter fades into quiet, another begins. Now we step into Chapter 6, Sexuality and Birth, Egypt's secrets of contraception, fertility, and the dream of life.
The story of fertility in Egypt was never only about children, it was about eternity. To the Egyptians, each act of intimacy, each birth, was not isolated. It was a thread in the great weave of life, binding the past to the present and the present to the future. Sexuality was more than desire. It was a promise, a vow whispered into the silence of time. Life will continue, the name will endure. Dreams of children were dreams of immortality. A son or daughter were not simply a child, they were the carrier of lineage, the voice that would speak one's name long after death.
To dream of birth was to dream of one's own survival beyond the grave. Fertility was, in this sense, a shield against oblivion. The Nile itself mirrored this cycle. Each year it flooded, nourishing the land, retreating, and then returning again. So too did human love ebb and flow, bringing forth new life, retreating into silence, then blooming again. Egyptians saw in this rhythm the echo of the gods' eternal dance, Osiris dying and rising, Isis weeping and creating, Horus taking flight. Life, death, and rebirth were not separate, they were one continuous circle. Sexuality, then, was sacred because it held within it both mortality and eternity. In the fleeting moment of desire, there was the seed of forever. In the laughter of a newborn child, there was the answer to ancient prayers. And in the silence of the tomb, there was comfort, for one knew the cycle would begin again. Imagine a couple gazing at the stars, whispering to each other. For them, their embrace is not only passion, but legacy. Their love is not just fire, but flame carried into the next generation. In that embrace, they feel the truth of Egypt itself, that sexuality is not an ending, but a continuation, a covenant with the gods that life will never truly cease. And so, chapter 6 closes with this vision: intimacy as eternity, fertility as the eternal cycle. But beyond the sacred and the celebrated, there were also shadows, whispers of practices hidden in temples, acts that blurred the line between devotion and taboo. To step further is to enter the mysteries that few dared to speak of. In ancient Egypt, sexuality and fertility were woven together like reeds along the Nile. To the Egyptians, intimacy was not only pleasure or devotion, it was the seed of life itself, the bridge between mortal love and eternal continuation. Every touch, every embrace carried within it the potential for creation, the echo of gods who once shaped the world through passion and union. They believed that the body was not separate from the cosmos. Just as the Nile flooded each year to bring fertility to the fields, so too did intimacy between men and women bring fertility to the human family. Desire was not chaos, it was order, balance, and destiny. In this belief, sexuality was sacred, not only because it united lovers, but because it shaped the future of lineage, inheritance, and divine harmony. Within families, fertility was celebrated. Children were blessings, but more than blessings, they were proofs of continuity, the threads that tied one generation to the next. To be childless was to fear disconnection, to worry that one's name might vanish like sand blown into the desert. Thus, intimacy was approached not only with longing, but with responsibility. Imagine a couple lying under the stars, listening to the quiet lap of the Nile's waters. For them, desire was not only a moment's flame, but a prayer. Their union was like sowing seeds into the earth, hopeful, reverent, sacred. In their embrace, they felt not only their own pleasure, but also the presence of Isis and Osiris, the gods who first taught humankind that love could create life. This was fertility beliefs in ancient Egypt, the conviction that intimacy shaped destiny. And so, even as Egyptians celebrated passion, they carried within them the knowledge that each kiss, each act was also an invocation of life, a whisper to the gods asking for blessing. Thus begins our journey into Chapter 6, exploring the secret methods, rituals, and beliefs the Egyptians held, ways they sought to welcome, delay, or even shape the children who might be born of their love.
Not every union in ancient Egypt was meant to bring forth life. While fertility was celebrated, Egyptians also sought ways to control it, to delay birth, to protect families, to give space between children. And so, within their medicine and magic, they devised unusual, creative, sometimes startling methods of contraception. Texts like the Kahun Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents in the world, reveal recipes for birth control. Some involved mixtures of honey, acacia leaves, and natron placed within the womb. Honey was believed to block and purify. Acacia fermented into a substance that created an acidic environment. And natron, the same mineral used in mummification, was thought to protect against unwanted conception. Strangely, in a way, science was hidden in the ritual. Modern research suggests that acacia does indeed produce lactic acid, a natural spermicide. Other methods were more mystical. Women might wear amulets inscribed with protective spells, calling upon the power of Isis or Hathor to close the womb until the right time. Priests might whisper incantations over oils, transforming them into charms of both pleasure and protection. Here, contraception was not just medical, it was spiritual, part of the eternal dance between body and gods. Some records describe barriers fashioned from linen, soaked in mixtures of dates and honey, inserted as protective coverings. Others speak of strange concoctions involving crocodile dung, thought to form a barrier and invoke the fierce fertility of Sobek, the crocodile god. To us, such methods sound harsh or unthinkable, but to the Egyptians, they were part of a system where nature, animal, and deity all played their role in human life. Imagine a woman preparing such a mixture by the dim light of an oil lamp. She crushes acacia, stirs honey, and whispers a prayer to Isis. For her, it is not only medicine, it is safety, control, and reverence. Her body is not only flesh, but a vessel where desire and destiny meet, and contraception is the key that allows her to choose. This was Egyptian contraception methods, an interplay of plants and minerals, of magic and faith, of science hidden within ritual. To listen to their story is to hear how even in ancient times, humans sought mastery over the mysteries of life, balancing passion with protection, love with caution, fertility with freedom.
Beneath the flickering glow of temple lamps, fertility was never left to chance. Families longed for children, and lovers yearned for lineage. But to conceive was more than biology. It was a dialogue with the gods. Every ritual, every offering, every intimate act carried with it a plea whispered into the cosmic silence. Let life begin here. At the heart of this belief was the story of Isis and Osiris. When Osiris was slain and scattered, Isis gathered him piece by piece and through her love restored him.
From their sacred union came Horus, the falcon god, the eternal child of rebirth. To Egyptians, this was no myth, but a model. Intimacy itself was resurrection, fertility a divine triumph. A couple's embrace became an echo of the gods' eternal love, their desire an act of cosmic alignment. Rituals to encourage conception were vivid and symbolic. Couples hoping for children would journey to temples of Hathor, goddess of love and joy, or Min, god of fertility and potency. Offerings were made, lotus flowers, ripe pomegranates, bread shaped like the organs of creation. Each gift was a symbol, each gesture a wordless prayer that life might blossom into life. Some accounts describe rites where priestesses embodied goddesses, their songs and dances channeling divine power into human longing. In such ceremonies, the line between devotion and desire blurred. Sexuality was not hidden, it was sanctified. Even the act of physical union, carried out within sacred space, could be regarded as an offering to please the gods and ensure fertility not just for the couple, but for the land itself. Picture this scene. The fragrance of incense fills the temple. Shadows dance across painted walls, and the steady rhythm of the sistrum echoes like a heartbeat. A couple kneels, hands intertwined, whispering their hopes for a child. The priestess raises her arms, blessing them with words that shimmer like moonlight. In that moment, their desire is prayer, and prayer is desire. This was fertility rituals in Egypt, ceremonies where passion and piety became indistinguishable, where intimacy itself was elevated to the divine. Through these acts, Egyptians believed they could secure not only children, but the continuation of their names, their families, their place in eternity.
The night sky was not just a canvas of stars for the Egyptians. It was a book of signs. And within its silence, many believed they could read the destiny of their children even before they were born. Gender was not seen as a random outcome of chance. It was something that could be guided, shaped, perhaps even chosen through ritual and belief. Ancient records suggest that couples would seek divine guidance to determine whether a child would be male or female. Dreams played a central role. A dream of water might signify a daughter, a dream of falcons or strong animals, a son. To dream of Isis was a sign of maternal blessing, while to dream of Horus was an omen of male heirs. These visions were treasured, interpreted by priests who served as the bridge between mortals and gods. Rituals accompanied these beliefs. Couples might engage in intimacy on nights considered sacred, under certain stars, believing the alignment of heavens would influence the child's gender. Specific foods were consumed: onions and garlic for sons, sweet fruits and honey for daughters. Amulets were worn by mothers-to-be, inscribed with prayers like, "May Hathor grant me a daughter," or "May Horus give me a son." One method, described in fragments of papyrus, even suggested using herbal mixtures as tests of fertility and gender prediction. A woman's urine was poured over barley and emmer wheat. If barley sprouted first, it foretold a son. If emmer grew first, a daughter. Though mystical in intent, this test has echoes of science.
Modern studies show certain hormonal changes can indeed affect seed germination. Imagine a young couple lying awake in their mud brick home, the Nile whispering nearby. The wife dreams of a hawk soaring above the desert, and upon waking, she clutches her chest in wonder. The husband smiles, believing Horus has promised them a boy. That night, they whisper prayers to the stars, asking the gods to shape their unborn child. This was fertility beliefs in ancient Egypt, a tapestry where biology, dream, and divinity were threads of the same cloth. To them, children were not only gifts, but also destiny itself. And in that destiny, gender mattered deeply.
The story of fertility in Egypt was never only about children. It was about eternity. To the Egyptians, each act of intimacy, each birth, was not isolated. It was a thread in the great weave of life, binding the past to the present and the present to the future. Sexuality was more than desire. It was a promise, a vow whispered into the silence of time. Life will continue. The name will endure. Dreams of children were dreams of immortality. A son or daughter were not simply a child. They were the carrier of lineage, the voice that would speak one's name long after death. To dream of birth was to dream of one's own survival beyond the grave. Fertility was, in this sense, a shield against oblivion. The Nile itself mirrored this cycle. Each year it flooded, nourishing the land, retreating, and then returning again. So too did human love ebb and flow, bringing forth new life, retreating into silence, then blooming again. Egyptians saw in this rhythm the echo of the gods' eternal dance, Osiris dying and rising, Isis weeping and creating, Horus taking flight. Life, death, and rebirth were not separate. They were one continuous circle. Sexuality, then, was sacred because it held within it both mortality and eternity. In the fleeting moment of desire, there was the seed of forever. In the laughter of a newborn child, there was the answer to ancient prayers. And in the silence of the tomb, there was comfort, for one knew the cycle would begin again. Imagine a couple gazing at the stars, whispering to each other. For them, their embrace is not only passion, but legacy. Their love is not just fire, but flame carried into the next generation. In that embrace, they feel the truth of Egypt itself, that sexuality is not an ending, but a continuation, a covenant with the gods that life will never truly cease. And so, chapter 6 closes with this vision: intimacy as eternity, fertility as the eternal cycle. But beyond the sacred and the celebrated, there were also shadows, whispers of practices hidden in temples, acts that blurred the line between devotion and taboo. To step further is to enter the mysteries that few dared to speak of. What happens when intimacy crosses the line between devotion and taboo? In Egypt, a land where gods walked beside mortals and statues were vessels of divinity, the boundary was delicate, shifting like sand in the desert wind. Worship was never distant. The gods were close, present, embodied in stone, wood, and ritual.
And for some, that closeness blurred into something more, an intimacy both mystical and forbidden. Whispers from temple lore tell of priestesses who tended statues of gods as if they were living beings. Oils were poured, robes changed, flowers offered. But within these acts of devotion lay another layer, gestures of tenderness, caresses upon sacred forms, songs sung not only in praise, but in longing. To touch the god's statue was to touch divinity itself, and for some, perhaps, to feel desire as a form of worship. This intimacy was not spoken of openly. It lived in the margins of papyri, in fragments of poetry that hinted at passion beyond human reach. A verse might describe the warmth of a stone figure, the gaze of painted eyes, the trembling of a priestess as she anointed a sacred idol. To outsiders, this would seem strange. To believers, it was an extension of faith, the soul reaching beyond the veil, using desire as a bridge. Imagine the temple at night. The air is heavy with incense. Shadows dance across carved walls, and the statue of a god stands luminous in the torchlight. A priestess approaches, bearing oil. Her hand lingers a moment too long. Her whisper turns softer, almost like a lover's sigh. In that space, power and passion are one, and what is taboo becomes mystical. This was mystical intimacy in Egypt, not crude, not reckless, but layered in silence and secrecy. It reveals a truth still haunting, that in the most sacred spaces, desire can live quietly, entwined with devotion, shimmering at the edge of what is allowed.
In the shimmering halls of a pharaoh's palace, beneath gilded ceilings and walls painted with eternal scenes, whispers stirred. Whispers of intimacy, whispers of secrets, whispers that carried the weight of both desire and danger. For Pharaoh was not merely a man, he was a god in flesh, the bridge between heaven and earth. And to lie with him was not only passion, but power. Rumors tell of women, concubines, noble daughters, even priestesses, whose union with the pharaoh was said to carry mystical weight. To share his bed was to touch divinity, to drink from the source of Maat, the cosmic order. Yet, with such intimacy came peril. A glance mistaken for love, a touch perceived as ambition, could be both salvation and downfall. In some accounts, pharaohs were believed to partake in rituals of renewal, symbolic unions that echoed the cosmic marriage of gods. A queen, or sometimes a chosen woman, might represent Isis, while the pharaoh embodied Osiris. Their intimacy was more than private. It was performance, sacred theater, where the fate of Egypt was woven into the hush of the night. But behind these ceremonies lay the darker whispers, tales of pharaohs whose desires stretched into taboo, statues, sacred idols, even bloodlines too close, stories shrouded in secrecy, spoken only in cautious tones. Were they truth, or were they warnings? We may never know. But they remind us that in Egypt, intimacy was never free of power. It was both gift and burden, sanctuary and snare. Imagine the royal chamber. Lamps flickering, golden perfume burners filling the air, silken curtains swaying like shadows. A woman approaches the pharaoh, her steps careful, her eyes lowered. In her heart is not only longing, but fear.
For to please him is to rise, to displease him is to vanish into silence. In this space, passion and politics are indistinguishable. Love and power are one. This was mystical intimacy with the pharaoh, a place where desire became a tool, where devotion blurred into ambition, and where the line between sacred and forbidden was as fragile as papyrus in the desert wind.
The Egyptians told of Min, a god unlike any other. He was the lord of fertility, the master of potency, his statues unmistakable, towering, proud, with symbols that left little to the imagination. To worship Min was to confront the raw force of creation itself, a reminder that life springs from desire, and desire is not always gentle. Festivals in his honor were celebrated with unabashed vigor. Farmers carried offerings of lettuce, a plant believed to stir virility, and placed them before his image. Songs rose, drums thundered, and processions wound through villages. Yet within this celebration of life lurked rituals whispered about in shadows, gestures of intimacy performed not only for joy, but as offerings, acts blurring the line between devotion and the forbidden. Some accounts suggest that priestesses, embodying the spirit of fertility, danced unclothed before the god's statue. Their movements were not mere entertainment, but ritual, a living hymn to Min's power. In rare whispers, it is said that couples themselves might unite within temple grounds, believing their passion, visible to the god, would ensure fertile fields and fertile wombs alike. Such practices, if true, lived on the edge of taboo, suspended between the sacred and the profane. To outsiders, these rites might seem shocking, but to Egyptians, they were echoes of cosmic truth. Desire was not sin, it was the engine of life. By giving it space within ritual, they sought harmony with the gods, balance with the universe. The boundary between acceptable and forbidden was fluid, shifting with context, with belief, with the silence of the temple walls. Imagine the scene. Torches blazing, the statue of Min towering, his hand raised in eternal gesture. The air hums with chants and laughter. A woman places a wreath of flowers at his feet, her eyes closed as if in prayer. The people cheer, believing the god smiles upon them. In this moment, the taboo is not shame, it is power transformed. Mystery embraced. This was the mystical intimacy of Egypt's fertility cults, dangerous to name, yet unforgettable to imagine. For in worship of Min, we glimpse how the Egyptians lived at the very edge of ritual, where desire itself was sanctified, even when it trembled on the border of the forbidden. What happens when the body itself becomes an offering? In Egypt's shadowed rituals, there were whispers of practices where intimacy was not only shared, but surrendered. Acts where flesh became prayer and desire itself was the sacrifice. The Egyptians believed the body was a vessel of divine power. Just as statues housed gods, so too could human beings embody sacred presence. In certain rites, men and women offered not incense or flowers, but themselves. Their touch, their union, their pleasure was framed not as indulgence, but as liturgy. To yield one's body was to declare,
I am open to the gods. Let life and power flow through me. Priestesses, especially, were seen as living conduits of the divine. Some records suggest that during festivals of fertility, chosen women would embody Hathor or Isis, allowing worshippers to approach them not simply as humans, but as vessels of sacred love. To touch them, even symbolically, was to brush against eternity. These acts blurred the line between the intimate and the divine, between devotion and taboo. Other traditions hinted that warriors or servants might dedicate themselves physically to Pharaoh as part of loyalty rituals. In those gestures, submission of the body became submission of the soul. Intimacy was transformed into politics, binding loyalty with desire. What might seem forbidden to us was to them a form of sealing power, making oaths not in words, but in touch. Picture a chamber dimly lit, the scent of resin thick in the air. A woman stands before an idol, her body anointed with oil, her eyes closed in trance. Each movement of her hand is both dance and prayer. The crowd watches in silence, knowing she is no longer only herself, she is the goddess incarnate. Her body, offered in gesture, becomes the bridge between earth and sky. This was the mystical intimacy of Egypt's body offering rituals, strange, perilous, yet profoundly human. For in surrendering the body, they sought to transcend it. What was taboo became the key to touch eternity, hidden forever in the silence of temple walls.
Between devotion and transgression, there lies a silence Egypt never dared to write down. In papyri, on temple walls, in official hymns, the language of purity prevails. Yet, in the gaps, in the missing lines, in the half-erased verses, we sense something else, a world of intimacy that touched the edge of the forbidden. It was never shouted. It lived in whispers, in the flicker of oil lamps, in the veils of incense, in the careful movements of priestesses and queens. Desire was there, undeniable, yet clothed in symbols. A statue caressed, a ritual performed in secrecy, a union meant not only for love but for power. The Egyptians, masters of symbolism, left us fragments, enough to glimpse, never enough to fully see. This silence was itself powerful. By not writing, they preserved mystery. By not declaring, they allowed ritual to live in shadows. For some, this was protection. For others, it was reverence. Egypt understood that the most dangerous truths are the ones best left hidden. Imagine standing before a temple wall where scenes of harvest, prayer, and sacrifice are carved. Yet, in the empty space between figures, you feel a presence, an untold story. That emptiness is not void. It is fullness withheld, secrets suspended in stone. There lies the tension between sacred and forbidden, devotion and transgression. And so chapter 7 ends not with revelation, but with a hush. The forbidden practices, the mystical intimacies remain shrouded in ambiguity. They remind us that even the most powerful civilization trusted silence more than confession, mystery more than exposure. But silence does not mean absence. Beneath it, desire still moved, power still shifted, intimacy still bound mortals to gods. The
the story does not end. It flows into dream. Now, let the whispers of Egypt carry you into the desert night. The sand cool beneath the stars, the wind a soft lullaby. In the distance, the voice of Isis drifts like a sigh, guiding us toward the final vision. And with that, we step gently into Chapter 8, The Dream of the Desert.
The desert at night is unlike any place on earth. When the sun sinks beyond the horizon, leaving the sands cool beneath your feet, the world shifts into silence. The dunes glow silver under the watch of the stars, and the air is soft, carrying whispers older than memory itself. This is where Egypt dreams. In this silence, one can almost hear the voice of Isis, the Great Mother, drifting across the desert winds. Her whispers are not commands, but lullabies. She speaks of love, of longing, of mysteries guarded in temples and buried in tombs. And as her voice moves, it softens the heart, inviting rest. The desert has always been Egypt's eternal backdrop, a sea of sand against which the story of life and death, of love and intimacy was written. And yet, at night, the desert is no longer harsh. It is gentle, like a mother's hand. The cool wind strokes the skin. The stars gleam like eyes watching kindly from above. And the earth itself seems to hum with a soothing rhythm. Imagine lying on the desert floor, your head cradled by warm sand, your gaze lost in the endless stars. Around you, the silence deepens until even your thoughts begin to fade. You hear only the soft pulse of your own breath, mingling with the breath of the night. Each exhale is a surrender, each inhale a gift. Slowly, you sink into the desert's embrace. This is a bedtime story of Egypt, not of pharaohs or wars, but of stillness. The kind of stillness that heals, the kind of stillness that cradles. Here, intimacy is not passion, but peace. Here, the greatest secret Egypt offers is not power, not ritual, but rest. So let the desert whisper to you tonight. Let the sands hold you, the stars watch over you, and Isis hum her ancient lullaby. For in this silence, sleep comes not as an end, but as a continuation. Just as Egypt always believed life was not an ending, but a cycle.
Far across the desert, where the horizon dissolves into starlight, there lingers a song of love. It is not loud, not shouted. It drifts like a sigh, carried by the winds that have moved over these sands for thousands of years. The desert remembers not only kings and temples, but lovers. Secret meetings beneath palm trees, vows whispered in shadow, embraces that once glowed brighter than firelight. The Egyptians believed that love itself was eternal. When Isis gathered Osiris's broken body and brought him back to life through devotion, she was not only reviving a god, she was showing that desire, tenderness, and intimacy are stronger than death. Every story of passion, whether written on papyrus or lived in silence, was a fragment of that truth. To love was to resist time. To desire was to promise life again. At night, the desert holds these truths close. Imagine lying beneath the open sky, your body warmed by the sand, your heart softened by the stars. Each gust of wind is like a lover's breath against your skin. Each star above is an ancient eye, watching, remembering the countless hearts that once beat with longing. In this stillness, you feel less alone. You are part of a tapestry, woven with threads of love older than history. Slowly, the rhythm of the desert becomes your own. Your breath falls in harmony with the night. Your body grows heavier, as if held by unseen arms, and as your eyes close, you realize you are not falling into emptiness. You are falling into embrace. Love does not end, it transforms. Desire does not vanish, it becomes memory. It becomes dream. This is a soothing ancient tale of Egypt, where even the silence carries affection, where even the stars remember intimacy. Sleep, then, is not departure, but union. To rest is to join Isis and Osiris, to echo the eternal dance of love and rebirth. So let the desert cradle you tonight. Let the whispers of ancient lovers hum around you. Let Isis sing her lullaby, not only of rest, but of devotion. And as you drift into dream, know this: you are held, you are loved, and in love, you are eternal.